Uh, Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers and especially Shubhro for inviting me here. Uh, I'm going to introduce a new quantum magnet, calcium bromate, and show that it displays all experimental signatures of a quantum spin liquid. So I'll give a brief introduction to spin liquids and then introduce the structure of the compound and then start showing the measurements which we've done over a period of 3 years. Actually, it's been, I said it's a new compound, but we've been working on it for a while. But this is the first presentation that I think the collaboration is giving anywhere on this material. Okay. So at the outset, I'd like to acknowledge the people who have worked on this over the 3 years that I've mentioned. And the project was driven by Belalek's group in Berlin, and they did most of the inelastic neutron scattering work, which was most important in trying to show that the excitations were spin-on-like and so on. And then people at the PSI and ILL who did USR, INS, the measurements at the beamline, AC Chi measurements, which ruled out spin glass, for example, and low temperature heat capacities, absence of order, and then if I find time, I'll talk about FRG calculations by Johannes Reuther, mostly because I don't understand them very well, so I'll try to skip them. Okay, so this morning I was looking at the some of the other titles of talks in the conference, and so I included a couple of slides to connect my talk to the topological part of the conference. So the existing paradigm in which one talks about phases and transformation between phases is the concept of broken symmetry, and I give here two examples. When a liquid is cooled, it freezes into a solid, which breaks translational symmetry, and a paramagnet, when cooled sufficiently, goes into a ferromagnet, and that breaks rotational symmetry that the spins had. So these are examples of phase transitions which can be understood within this paradigm. But the question is that can one have phases with no broken symmetry or obvious order parameters? And the answer is yes. And topological states of matter are such states where there are no broken symmetries and no obvious order parameters in. So one has to talk about topological orders, and quantum Hall and quantum spin Hall effects are two such examples. And the amazingly robust quantization in the transport, for example, versus magnetic field is a consequence of the topological order. But this is not the topic of my talk. My talk will focus on spin liquids, and these are also examples of phases which do not break any local symmetries. So if one had antiferromagnetically coupled spins on a triangle, for example, one would have these six states which would be degenerate, and the triangle would not know which state to condense into and would keep fluctuating. So a triangle with antiferromagnetically coupled spins on a triangle is in some sense a spin liquid, and this state, which is a superposition of all these six degenerate states, does not break any local symmetry. And there's no obvious order parameter. In fact, for example, the RVB state on a triangular lattice is an example of a spin liquid with topological order. So the first theoretical proposal for the existence of spin liquid like states was given by Anderson when he proposed the idea of valence bonds. So the idea is that if you have a pair of antiferromagnetically coupled spins, the lowest energy state would be a spin singlet. And so one can decorate your the lattice with such spin singlet states, which are called valence bonds. And now if the pattern, if the decoration is static, it does not resonate, or the pattern is not changing in time, then one would have what is called a valence bond solid, and this state actually breaks translational symmetry, and so this is not a liquid. However, if you allow the valence bonds to resonate, which means that they can form singlets not only with a fixed nearest neighbor, but any nearest neighbor that it likes, then the ground state would be a linear combination of all such configurations which are allowed, which could be very large in numbers. And therefore, this state, a combination of all of these configurations, would be spin liquid. And this would be what is called the short range RVB, because the singlets are formed only on nearest neighbors. And an excitation in such a state would still be gapped, because one needs to break one of these singlets into a triplet. And so this would be a gapped spin liquid. The other possibility is that the singlets are formed between spins which are far apart, so that the binding energies actually can be very, very small. And these are what are called long-range RVBs. And the energy to make excitations in such a state would be could be very, very small. And these would be examples of gapless spin liquids. So I want to introduce the concept of a spin-on in such spin liquids, and this view graph is actually stolen from Federico Becca's presentation in a similar school some time ago. So suppose you had a 1D Heisenberg chain decorated by these valence bonds. So the lowest energy excitation would be flipping one of these spins to make a triplet. So this S equals to 1 excitation that you make can now travel apart independently of each other, because one just needs to rearrange these valence bonds, which are already in the ground state because they are superpositions of each other. If I translate this pattern by a lattice parameter, it still is a degenerate pattern that I had already drawn here. So the spin-ons, the pair of excitations that I had created by flipping one spin can move apart independently of each other, and so they behave like separate particles carrying spin half but no charge. So this excitation is called a spin-on, and they are always created in pairs. So similarly, in 2D, one could have a unpaired spin which could move around just by rearranging the valence bonds, and it would cost no energy, and so the spin-ons would be mobile. And in such a state, the experimental signatures of a spin liquid and indeed a presence of a spin-on would be that the charge transport would be insulating, and yet the other thermodynamic measurements like specific heat, susceptibility, and thermal conductivity would be metallic-like, coming from the spin-on surface. So the recipe to make then spin liquids is actually to enhance quantum fluctuation somehow, and that would be possible if you had small spins sitting on low dimensional or low coordination number lattices, and if one can introduce geometrical frustration to suppress the tendency for long-range order, that also helps. So indeed, most spin liquid candidates are spin half quasi low dimensional magnets with antiferromagnetic exchange, because that is what would lead to the frustration. And these are some examples of candidates which have been studied as a possible spin liquid candidate. And I think the Herberth-Smithite is something that everybody agrees shows all experimental signatures of a spin liquid. There are question marks about the others, but to some degree or the other, but the Herberth-Smithite has been now universally agreed as a spin liquid. So we will show that our compound shows everything that Herberth-Smithite does. Okay. So this is the material. It's the formula itself is very complicated, and the details of the structure doesn't matter because I've shown it here. there are two chromium sites which are magnetic, but several oxygen sites, which leads to the formation of CrO4 tetrahedra, which are distinct from each other. So there are 4 different kinds of CrO4 tetrahedra, and there are layers which are separated from each other along the C-axis of the crystal. So if one looks down the C-axis, one sees a Kagome bilayer, similar to the gallium garnet that Kedar had flashed. And if one looks at only one of these bilayers, one sees that there are 2 kinds of inequivalent triangles, equilateral triangles, which alternate. So a triangle of the kind 2 is surrounded by triangles of kind 1 and vice versa. Right. Yes. And so the blue and the red, the bonds, show the different bond lengths in these triangles. And I will show later that this leads to the magnetic interactions themselves on these triangles being different. Okay. So the first thing one does is magnetic susceptibility, and it's a bilayer Kagome. So this is one of the Kagome layers that I took from the top, and it's a bilayer Kagome. Which one? This one? Oh, the colors are all the same. So they look different, but they're all the red ones, these ones, one of these layers. The bonds, so right now the bonds don't mean anything, but the color coding later will mean the different magnetic interaction. Right now I'm just showing that the pattern is Kagome. So it's a local moment magnet, and the effective moment turns out to be 6/7 per chromium of what one would expect for a spin half. And that means that out of the 7 chromiums in the formula unit, 1 is non-magnetic and 6 are magnetic. If I had drawn the 7th chromium, which was non-magnetic, it would sit in the middle of the Kagomes and form a triangular lattice. But that's non-magnetic, so I don't show it here anyway. And then the Weiss temperature is ferromagnetic and small, 2.35. The magnetization shows that I can saturate the moment at a field of about 12 Tesla. So that's about 17, 18 Kelvin. And that shows that the largest magnetic scale in this system is about that much. So the Curie-Weiss constant being 2.35 suggests that there are other antiferromagnetic interactions which suppress the theta, which is an average of all interactions. But it says that the dominant interactions are ferromagnetic. The presence of antiferromagnetic interactions is also seen in the low temperature susceptibility. This is 1 by chi, which falls below what one would expect for the ferromagnet. So 1 by chi falling below means susceptibility becoming smaller, and that means antiferromagnetic. So one has both dominant ferromagnetism and weak antiferromagnetism, and it's surprising that a magnet with dominant ferromagnetism would be a spin liquid candidate. So I present here the specific heat versus temperature, and this is these curves. And at high temperatures, it's dominated by the lattice contribution, but at low temperatures, there's a bump, which is magnetic in nature. We've done other field-dependent measurements which suppress this peak, and so we are sure that this is magnetic in nature. But it's not the sharp peak that one would expect for a long-range order. If one calculates the entropy released between the lowest measurement temperature here, which is 0.3 Kelvin, and about 23 Kelvin or so, it reaches about 90 Kelvin, 90% of 90% of what is expected for a spin half. And so, if there is any long-range order present below these temperatures, it can only release about 10% of the entropy, and that would be a very reduced moment ordering if at all. If I expand the region, the temperature region below this, we see another bump here, after which the specific heat seems to be falling. And so the absence of long-range order could result from valence bond solid, as I had mentioned before. And so we have tried to fit the data in this region to this dimer susceptibility, which would be the contribution of the valence bond solid excited to a triplet. And so the band, the gap that we get, the triplet gap that we get is tiny, 0.09 MeV, if at all. So another reason for the absence of long-range order could be that the system actually freezes into a spin glass-like phase, and that can be seen in dynamic susceptibility, and we've plotted here the AC susceptibility versus temperature at various frequencies down to, I think, 50 millikelvin. We see a broadish peak, which is not what one would expect for a long-range order, which would be very sharp. Even the AC Chi peaks for spin glasses are quite sharp. However, we do see a frequency dependence. So there is a common way of doing an analysis to see the distribution of relaxation times, and that is called the Cole-Cole analysis. So what one does is, we plot an Argand kind of diagram, where you plot the imaginary part of the susceptibility and the real part of the susceptibility at various temperatures as a function of the frequency. And then if one has only a single relaxation time, you get a perfect semicircle, and if you have a distribution of times, you get a flattish curve here. So we have fitted this, our data with this expression, Cole-Cole expression. You can find this also in my Dosh's book on spin glasses. We find that they are almost perfect semicircles, and there is a parameter alpha here, the Cole-Cole parameter, which gives you the extent of the distribution of time scales. And if alpha is 1, it is an infinite distribution of time scales, and if alpha is 0 or close to 0, we have a single relaxation time. And alpha for our compounds, our compound at all temperatures comes out to be 0.05. So this shows that we have a single relaxation time in the crystal. Here I have flashed some other examples of similar Cole-Cole analysis being done on magnets, which, for example, spin ice, pyrochlor Dy2 Ti2O7. It freezes below about 0.3 Kelvin, 15 Kelvin. 0.3 Kelvin is my temperature. And it shows frequency dependence. However, the Cole-Cole plot shows that the relaxation time in this system is only 1. It is a single relaxation time. If one takes a typical spin glass like FeAl2O4 diluted with some impurities, non-magnetic impurities, then one sees that this Cole-Cole plot is completely flat and not semicircular, and this clearly shows that there are distribution of time scales. So the fact that we get semicircular, almost perfect semicircles shows that there is only a single relaxation time in our system. So this peak is not a spin glass formation. This is also confirmed by low temperature μSR, and these temperatures have been done down to temperatures 19 millikelvin, much smaller than any other previous measurement done on the system. I show here the polarization versus time at various temperatures, and we see that they all relax rapidly as opposed to what one would expect for a long-range ordered magnet, which would show oscillations in this polarization dependence as a function of time. There's no such oscillations. Now a spin glass would also not show oscillations. So to rule out whether this is a spin glass or not, one does longitudinal field μSR measurements. And what one does is the following. So one can fit the relaxation at zero field with either a formula which takes into account static but random fields, which a spin glass would show, like this one, or a dynamically fluctuating local fields, which is this. And then using the fit parameters, one can simulate what one would obtain for different fields for a spin glass. These dashed lines are what one would expect if it was a spin glass phase for these fields. And we see that the data actually all fall on top of each other here and do not follow what one would expect for a spin glass. So there's no ordering by μSR, no long range ordering, no freezing. The relaxation times can be fitted using a combination of two exponentials, actually one exponential and one stretched. And these two terms come from the two muon sides that one expects in this crystal structure. And one can get the relaxation rates. So what we see here is the following. We have plotted the relaxation rates versus time. And we see that below about 3 Kelvin or so, the relaxation rates start to increase. And then below about half a Kelvin or 0.4 Kelvin, they saturate and then become temperature independent. So these are the temperatures at which we had seen broadish bumps in the specific heat. And what that means is that below 0.3 Kelvin or so, one gets persistent slow dynamics, which is temperature independent now, typical of a spin liquid. So we have done inelastic neutron scatterings to look at magnetic excitations. This is the neutron scattering intensity as a function of energy and integrated Q over all directions, because this is a powder and this is a crystal. And we see that there are two broad bands of excitations in both measurements, both on powders and crystals. And what we see is that these are very diffuse magnetic excitations as opposed to what one would expect for a long-range ordered system, which would be sharply defined and dispersive magnetic excitations. And so this again, these kinds of excitations, diffuse excitations and quasi-continuous as a function of energy within the band, are consistent with spin-on excitations. So the two distinct bands span these energy ranges. There is no magnetic scattering above 1.6 K. So we have gone all the way up to 5 MeV and found none beyond this. And this temperature scale matches what we had found from magnetization. We were able to saturate the system in a 12 Tesla field. So this is consistent with that. So here we show the neutron scattering intensity of single crystals with the momentum transfer within the bilayers, within the Kagome bilayers, and we see ring-like features. And I will show in detail in the next slide. And these ring-like features are sort of honeycombs, very similar to what was found for Herbert's meteorite. If one looks at the neutron scattering intensity perpendicular to the Kagome biplanes, then one sees that they are dispersionless. And this would mean that there is no magnetic interaction between the perpendicular to the Kagome planes, which means the Kagome bilayers are magnetically separated from each other. It's 2D magnetism. So this is what I was talking about. The magnetic excitations at low energies form kind of honeycombs with the peak intensities at the first Boulogne zone. And the theoretical calculations that I was talking about, or I was dreading to talk about, but I'll say them anyway. The pseudo-functional FRG, don't ask me what that is. Once we have gotten the Hamiltonian, before that. So what one does is that one takes nearest neighbor dimers on a triangular lattice and tries to simulate the neutron scattering intensity, and we see that qualitatively we see what the simulations agree with what we have seen in experiments. Although there are differences, and that may be because the simulated pattern just assumes dimers on a triangle, and the Hamiltonian that you obtain, as I will show finally, will have many more terms. The susceptibility calculated by FRG indeed matches our data well and does not show any long range down to the lowest temperatures. Okay, so with the diffuse magnetic excitations that we had obtained in zero field, we cannot extract any magnetic exchange parameters. But we are lucky that we are able to saturate magnetically saturate the material in 12 Tesla field. And so if we apply a 12 Tesla field and then look at the magnetic excitations, they would be magnon-like because we are exciting a ferromagnetic phase. So indeed, we see excitations which are now spin wave-like, and these are the calculated ones, and we see quite reasonable match with what we see. In fact, the match is quite nice. And again, spin waves at 9 Tesla, close to saturation at a different temperature and measured at a different facility, show dispersive waves when one measures with momentum transfer within the bilayers. But perpendicular to the bilayers, again, there is completely absence of dispersion, again showing that the magnetism is 2D. So these spin waves were actually fitted using linear spin wave theory, and the Hamiltonian was arrived at, and probably, yeah, this is the most important slide. So now the color code is the different magnetic exchange. So what one has is, one has Kagome bilayers. Within one bilayer, there are two different kinds of triangles with two different kinds of magnetic exchange. The dark blue one is ferromagnetic. The light green one is, what is, sorry, the light green one is ferromagnetic and the blue one is antiferromagnetic. And when one goes to the next bilayer, it reverses. So below this ferromagnetic triangle, there is an antiferromagnetic triangle here, and below the antiferromagnetic triangle, there is a ferromagnetic triangle. And the bilayers are connected by this red magnetic exchange, which is small but ferromagnetic. So left to itself, let's take one bilayer here. Left to itself, when one cools the system, the ferromagnetically coupled spin halves would form effective 3 halves because the ferromagnetism in these triangles is the strongest exchange. And then these become form a effective triangular lattice which is interacting antiferromagnetically by these blue bonds. So this would be a classical 3 halves on a triangular lattice which would actually show 120-degree order. And each of these bilayers would do this if they were not coupled ferromagnetically. So what the ferromagnetic coupling does is the following, that the top triangle wants to be a ferromagnet and the lower triangle wants to be an antiferromagnet, but they are coupled ferromagnetically, and that does not allow either the top layer or the bottom layer to condense into what it would want to. And this is the frustration mechanism. Even though the dominant magnetic exchanges are ferromagnetic, the system is frustrated because of this kind of coupling. So that's all. So I have presented a new complex oxide which has a complicated and yet beautiful structure made up of bilayer Kagome lattice of spin half chromium 5s. We have shown using various methods that there is no long-range ordering or freezing down to 19 millikelvin. The magnetic excitations in zero field are gapless and dispersionless and diffuse, consistent with spin-ons and completely different from what one would expect for a magnetically ordered state. And I have shown that unusual combination of both ferromagnetic and antiferromagnetic interactions in this lattice leads to the frustration, which leads to the long-range order being suppressed. Okay, I won't say anything about this. I don't know what this means. So for details, one can look at this preprint, which has just been accepted last week in Nature Physics. Thank you.
Thanks, Yogesh. So time for questions, comments. Yeah. Just wondering, is there any single ion anisotropy for the chromium moments?
No.
What's the lower upper bound we can?
So I probably went over it too fast. The So the susceptibility plot here is for both field parallel to the A and C, and there is no anisotropy at all. Even here, there are both parallel to A and C magnetizations. So if we assume that this bump is because of dimer specific heat and we fit it, we get a tiny gap, but we don't see that gap in the inelastic scattering, neutron scattering. As far as we can tell, the excitations in the neutron scattering are gapless.
And there's no sign of spin glass or
No. That is weaved by both MUSR and AC Chi.
Scattering look like? Not, I mean.
Oh, elastic scattering would probably just show Bragg peaks.
At
Whatever the lattice positions are, etc.
No, I mean the magnetic part.
Because there is no.
If you integrate over energy transfer.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't.
So if there's no more questions, so let's thank